His voice unraveled the secrets I'd buried too deep. The world ceased to spin the moment his voice enveloped me through the airwaves. Sitting there, slack-jawed and disbelieving, the podcast app on my phone was suddenly Pandora's box, and I had inadvertently flung it wide open. Confessions of the Unheard was supposed to be a safe space for anonymous tales of betrayal, but what I heard was personal. His voice, once a soothing balm after a long day, was now a raucous storm painting our life in strokes of fiction and farce. "She never listens," he claimed, his tone conspiratorial, speaking to strangers like plotting against me. I wanted to rage, to smash that mocking screen, but I froze instead, my eyes stinging with the sharp tang of unspent tears. If only it ended there, but it was just the beginning of my descent into his meticulous deceit. Could I sit by, or would I write the next chapter myself? It was his voice, there was no mistaking it. The same voice that whispered sweet nonsense to me in the night, now broadcasting intimate betrayals to whoever cared to tune in. I sat there, my heart pounding in my chest like it was trying to break free. Each syllable was a dagger, every pause an echo of laughter aimed directly at my soul. At first, I couldn't believe it. I mean, who would? Here's the man I thought I knew, the man I shared my life with, spilling secrets, twisting them, reshaping the intimate fabric of our relationship into something grotesque, monstrous, a melodrama for public consumption. Part of me wanted to laugh at the ridiculousness, but the laughter caught in my throat and died before it could be born. This was real. This was happening. He spoke about our first date, the way he described it, a disaster. I couldn't believe she would actually wear something like that, he quipped, his voice dripping with a levity I never heard when he talked about that night to me. He spun my worst insecurities into punch lines, our cherished moments into punchy anecdotes. I could almost see the leering smiles in my mind, the anonymous listeners soaking in every sordid detail with glee. Disbelief paralyzed me at first. My fingers hovered over the screen, itching to turn it off, stop the relentless betrayal pouring into my ears. Yet something held my hand, a grotesque compulsion to hear it all. Each moment of frustration, a storm swirling within, battled against the urge to stay, to listen to the specter of our life together narrated by an unfamiliar villain wearing my husband's skin. How dare he? The outrage ignited slowly, a smoldering ember in the pit of my stomach. Unrecognizable moments, turned cruel under twisted narratives, slid seamlessly from his mouth. "You know she always had this thing about control," he mused, fabricating stories layered with truth and falsehoods, each one a wound flayed open. My control, my independence, repainted as neurotic follies. The anger surged, hot and fierce, coursing through my veins and settling in my fingertips. They trembled as tears, angry and unbidden, clouded my vision. But I could not, would not, sniffle them away, lest I miss another detail of his callous patchwork of lies. I sat marooned between two worlds, the reality I thought I knew and the horror unraveling through tiny, tinny speakers. Finally, there was a pause, a brief, merciful moment of silence. But the damage was already done. The tendrils of poison had wound their way too deep into my heart. I stayed, waiting for more, waiting for the next bombshell to drop. Each second a war between wanting to sever the call and needing to confirm my worst fears. My thumb hovered over the screen, poised, wavering indecisively. And then, as if to mock me, he laughed. A chilling, casual chuckle, as if he were sharing an inside joke that only he could understand. My gut twisted, my heart sunk deeper, the weight of his betrayal pressing down on my chest. That laugh, it broke me. I wanted to scream, to shout, to break the silence of my living room with the raw, ragged howl building inside. But the sound wouldn't come, trapped behind clenched teeth, swallowed by pride and shock. Instead, I whispered to myself, a promise hanging unsaid in the air. This wouldn't be forgotten. I wouldn't let it be forgotten. I finally let the phone drop. The physical distance did little to quell the storm within. Each breath stung, a reminder that I was still here, still alone in our living room, engulfed in the shadows of betrayal and disbelief, waiting for the resolve that would carry this night's darkness into the cold, merciless light of tomorrow. It was as if I stood still while time groaned and shuddered around me, the moment that should have broken into clarity refusing to clear the fog that surrounded the last few years of my life. In the silence of our empty bedroom, the echoes of laughter and shared whispers beat at my temples, relics of a past untouched by deceit, yet now suspect in their very innocence. I stayed in the chill of the dim room, unwilling to turn on the light, as if the shadows themselves might cloak me from the truth I hadn't yet fully grasped. The quiet crept in slowly, wrapping around me with the suffocation of a heavy quilt. My eyes bore down on the bed, our bed, where every wrinkle in the sheets seemed to tell tales of unrest I had overlooked. How many times had I dismissed a lingering glance or a weary sigh, convinced it was nothing more than the day's fatigue rather than roots of discontent? My mind played cruel tricks, pushing memory upon memory to the surface, each weighed with the potential of having been a missed clue. Each recollection dropped like stones into my gut, distorting the water's surface, leaving ripples of doubt and self-reproach. I slipped into fragmented pockets of time when his smile had faltered mid-sentence or when his hand had grazed mine with the barest touch of indifference. But wasn't it natural, I thought, for affection to ebb and flow, for even the sunniest relationships to weather a little rain? My heart thudded painfully against my ribs, as if protesting its demand for the truth that was so elusive. The room smelled of freshly laundered linen and his cologne, remnants of the life we had built. Or had I been building it alone? The question pierced through me, sending fresh waves of uncertainty spilling through the cracks in my confidence. Was it me? I whispered to the empty room, hearing my voice, fragile and foreign, bounce weakly off the walls. The absence of an answer was a stifling thing, thick and bitter in the air like stale smoke. Flashbacks barreled through me, each more painful than the last, blurring the boundaries of past and present. An afternoon sprawled across the sunlit floor, his head beaten down by the tired weight of unsaid words, unbroken silences that I had mistaken for companionable peace. I waded deeper into my own soul-searching, dragging every resurfaced memory into the harsh light of scrutiny, testing them for cracks, for truths I had been too blind to see. His eyes, had they clouded when I walked into the room, perhaps? When did warmth drop away into that chill? And why had I never noticed the creeping frost? The questions gnawed at the structure of my resolve, leaving splinters of sadness and regret under my skin. For every moment of reassurance I thought I'd seen, another shadowed moment of doubt loomed larger now, casting long shadows over the remnants of our history. Finally, I sank to the floor, surrounded by silence as profound as it was maddening. No clarity, no revelation forthcoming from the mental excavation. Only the heartache of a love seated perhaps on hollow ground. The quiet spurred a raw determination, a resolve in its raw infancy. It wouldn't be tonight or tomorrow, but I would find that lost clarity. I swore to the quiet room that seemed to absorb my resolve. I stared blankly out the window, where the city moved on outside, untouched by my personal purgatory. In that steely gray light, with the weight of a lifetime's worth of doubt bearing down, I knew the search for truth was only just beginning. Somewhere, in the spectral haze of memories and the unfiltered light of introspection, I hoped to find whatever piece of me had been missing long before the confessions. The darkness settled heavy in our living room, a perfect reflection of the suffocating weight pressing down on my chest. I perched on the edge of the armchair, hidden in shadows, listening to the rhythm of the house, the low hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock barely perceptible in the tension-strung quiet. Every sound amplified as I waited for his return. When I heard his key slide into the lock, my breath hitched. The door swung open slowly, casting a wider shaft of light that spilled across the carpet and painted him in harsh relief. He moved like a ghost, unaware, as if walking through a scene he had played 100 times before. But I couldn't stay silent this time. It started as a whisper. "How could you?" Each word climbed in crescendo, feeding on the months of ignored suspicions that had rotted into certainty. Our life isn't some tragic fiction for others to consume while you play the wronged hero. His face flickered with something akin to shock, but it quickly morphed into the practiced mask of calm, the shield I'd come to despise. "What are you talking about?" His voice was too controlled, too measured, like an actor ready to deny the script's damning lines. I rose slowly, my knees stiff, palms damp. The studio microphone still lingering in my thoughts, transforming our everyday exchanges into testimonies, waiting for the verdict. I heard everything, you know. I gestured towards the table where misplaced sheets of half-drafted manuscripts lay accusingly, testaments to his lies spun into poisoned prose. He stepped back, hands slightly raised, as if warding off my anger. Listen, it's not what it seems, he started, but the trembling foundation beneath his feet was too weak to hold up the tower of deceit he'd built. I laughed, sharp and cutting. Then what is it? Some creative exercise where you rope us all in for your personal drama? Each chapter escalating with betrayal while you take notes. His jaw clenched and unclenched, the internal struggle of lies versus a desperate defense playing out across his face. He sighed, looking at me with a gaze that seemed to search for words lost between truths too painful to voice. I got caught up, okay? It started as something small, but the reaction was overwhelming. Readers wanted more. I didn't know how to stop it. Stop it. My voice rose, cracking under the strain of disbelief. You didn't even try. You brought outsiders into our marriage, painted me as the villain, leaving bits of us out there for judgment and pity. His silence was deafening, more so than any excuse could have been. Outside, the distant rumble of thunder promised a storm breaking, echoing the tumult inside. Do you even hear yourself? I pressed, stepping towards him, tasting the bitterness of betrayal, like ashes on my tongue. This is real, Alex. We are not characters you can manipulate for pathos or perspective. This is our life. Finally, his eyes met mine, vulnerability and defiance in equal measure flickering back at me. I'm sorry. I thought I could fix it before. Before what? Before you got caught. I cut him off, not willing to let him escape this confrontation with half-hearted apologies. The minutes stretched long, heavy with words spoken and those still unvoiced. Breathless, I crossed my arms, anchoring myself against what might come next. I can't do this, I whispered, the fight bleeding out of me, leaving a wound far deeper than anger could ever reach. You've made it impossible. He stood before me, hands falling to his sides, eyes shadowed in the soft light, and I realized this was the fork in the road, truth or dissolution. And for now, we were suspended in between, neither moving forward nor retreating, caught in the lingering aftermath of truths that could no longer be ignored. Choose, I said quietly, the word hanging between us like a fragile lifeline, just before the silence reclaimed us, whispering promises of storms yet to come. You shouldn't be alone, she had said, not in words exactly, but in the way her arms wrapped around me as soon as I crossed the threshold. My friend Laura's hug was warm, solid, a reminder that some things still held weight and wouldn't evaporate like the lies I'd been living under. But even here, amid the soft clutter of her living room, I felt the edges of my world crumbling. The next few moments blurred while I tried to ground myself in reality. Familiar scents, Laura's lavender candle mixed with the comforting bland smell of brewed tea, filled the room. My throat tightened, a silent plea rising from somewhere deep inside me. We settled on her worn couch, the fabric cool against my skin, grounding in its own way. So, Laura prompted gently, her voice low, anchoring. What happened? She didn't look at me, not directly. Instead, she traced the rim of her mug with a finger, a trace of nervous energy I clung to as much as the frail strings of my delusions. My mouth opened, words tangling before they could form. I found out. I began, my voice cracking like ice beneath footsteps. There was someone else. Has been for God knows how long. The confession hung between us, heavy, toxic. Laura's eyes finally locked with mine, the mingling of pity and shared pain making me flinch. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry, she said, soft and genuine, her hand now covering mine, both of us clasping at the available lifelines. Silence swelled. In that quiet, between the sipping of tea and the clinks of teaspoons against ceramic, vulnerability settled like dust. I felt raw, a nerve exposed, throbbing with every breath. Do you think it's over? I asked, voice barely a whisper, a question more for myself than her. She leaned back, considering. Her pause turned the room's warmth to a familiar chill, doubt, biting through the fragile calm. I can't answer that for you, she said eventually, her tone precise, careful. But maybe you need to think about what you truly want now, beyond the marriage, beyond the betrayal. Her words were too direct, sowing confusion and searing pain where they landed. I dropped my gaze, focusing instead on the gentle patterns of the carpet, tracing invisible paths of thought and desperation. What did I want? The question was a specter, haunting the shadows of my relationship. Did I want a patched-up version of us, stitched together with apologies and fragile promises? Or did I need more? More than what was left. I don't know if I can trust him again. I admitted, my confession a slow, mournful surrender. But is it really about trust? Or am I just afraid of being alone? Laura shifted, her presence a reassuring weight next to me. Fear's a powerful thing, she murmured. It cages you, makes you settle for less than what you deserve. But maybe, just maybe, it can also be a force for change. Her words lingered, echoing the silent, screaming doubts within. A catalyst and a question. Could fear, my constant companion, become the propulsion I needed to break free? The room faded into a thoughtful quiet. I stared at the ceiling, the patterns there as unknowable as the road ahead of me, riddled with uncertainty, yet also, dare I hope, potential? Laura brushed a stray tear from my cheek, a silent understanding passing between us. The unspoken promise lingered that whatever path I chose, I wouldn't walk it alone. This moment, however fraught with unease, held the possibility of a different future. As my mind slowly began weaving through possibilities, the question remained. Could love truly survive such betrayal, or was it merely a shadow of what once was? The answer, elusive, awaited its resolution in the decision yet to come. The room felt darker, smaller, as if whispering shadows were closing in on me. My laptop sat in front of me, glowing with an eerie, accusatory light. Episode after episode, I peeled back the layers of his crafted narrative, my marriage dissected and distorted for every hungered ear but mine. Each click to play felt like voluntarily stabbing myself, yet I couldn't stop. I needed to know how deep his lies had seeped into the foundation of my life. The first episode one chose was aptly titled Mistakes in the Mundane. It started with his cheerful, yet patronizing voice narrating over a stock photo montage, our blandly perfect facade for the world. In what world was our real? With every sentence, I realized our reality had been twisted into entertainment, our moments together turned into laughably poignant anecdotes. This was our life, trivialized and trampled upon for a few laughs, a few sad nods of agreement from unseen faces. His voice flooded the room. You ever feel like you're living someone else's life? That's exactly how I felt, married to her. I recoiled, a gut punch of nostalgia and nausea mixing into a sick concoction. My mind raced back to the night he proposed, the promise beneath the autumn sky heavier than the chill in the air. You're my forever, he whispered, gripping my fingers as if they were his last tether to existence. But now, in the stale air of a too-quiet living room, I realized they were chains, binding me to a lie he spun for an audience. I paused the video, letting the weight of betrayal wash over me like cold rain. I could hear my heartbeat, loud, insistent, echoing the silence around me. The air was thick with deception and, somehow, new clarity. I was living in echoes of laughter meant for others. The next episode cued automatically, dragging me from my momentary reverie. On the screen, a montage of poorly edited clips from our vacations played, my smiles co-opted into his soliloquy about love unraveling beneath the surface of perceived perfection. His words now were soft, laden with a faux gravitas meant to draw empathy. It wasn't just the big things, it was small, daily betrayals, her not seeing me, not understanding my needs. His clipped words cut deeper than any blade, rendering me breathless. This was the man I stayed awake waiting for, who I comforted when life seemed to drag him under. My fingers traced the keyboard, each button feeling like it needed forceful persuasion to continue. Tears welled up, unbidden, and I swallowed the salty bitterness as he spun half-truths into his masterpiece of deceit. I couldn't abandon this now. I needed to see it through, to the brutal end. As painful as it was, there was a perverse relief in knowing the full extent of his deceit, empowering in its own torturous way. He could twist the narrative all he wanted, but truth in its raw, ugly form was what I now sought. As the next episode faded onto the screen, I squared my shoulders, the resistance within me taking root. This wasn't just his story to tell, I realized. This was my life too, and for every lie he concocted, I would confront the truth. I refused to be defined by his narrative, to be merely a character in his drama. Strength flickered within me, small but determined, driving me forward. With each scene that replayed before my eyes, I was standing a little taller, a little surer. The web he'd woven would not be my prison. It would be the soil from which a new reality would emerge, one I controlled. The next click echoed in the hollow quiet of the room, resolve threading through every tightening sinew as I steeled myself for what was to come. If he could turn our lives into artifice, then so could I, and this time, I wouldn't shy away from the truth of my own voice. The room felt colder than usual, a chill seeping in through the cracks in our lives, now visibly broken in the pale morning light. I stood where his betrayal first laid itself bare, the kitchen where so many evenings had thickened with simmering unspoken words, threatened by the smallest spark. I traced the edge of the wooden table with my fingertips, each knot and groove etched with past conversations, now tainted by lies. My eyes settled on the cup of coffee, long gone cold, untouched, a habit lost with the man I thought I knew. An unexpected clarity hung in the air, sharp as the crisp autumn light threading through the window. It illuminated the mess I was left to sort out not just in this room, but within myself. I leaned back in the chair that was once ours, feeling the weight of his absence, not as a burden, but as a strange form of release. Could pain transform into something else? Something useful, even empowering? There was power simmering, a strength I almost didn't recognize, rising as if pulled from some buried wellspring. The realization seeped in slowly, like ink bleeding across a page. I had stories within me, truths I had abandoned at the altar of our marriage. A narrative not written by shared lies and silence, but by my voice. I let out a breath, watching it swirl like fog around what could now fill the empty spaces. Possibilities, the strength of my untold words. I stood abruptly, the chair scraping across the floor with a satisfying screech, a sound that spoke of new beginnings. Across the room, the shadows seemed softer, like an invitation. The house, a prison up until now, whispered freedoms hidden beneath its everyday appearances. Every framed photo, every shared artifact, was an opportunity to reclaim or redefine. I walked over to the bookshelf, tracing titles with a finger, each one an exploration of selves other than my own. Among them, a journal, untouched, like the coffee. I pulled it free, feeling its weight, the texture of its cover promising immediacy. It was a gesture of finality and of start. Within its pages, space to craft a life without pretense, and more importantly, a life unshadowed by his suffocating narrative. With deliberate care, I opened the journal, the blank lines wide with potential, each one a step further from the shadows of what we once were and towards the light of what I could become. Words came quickly then, almost too fast to capture, a clumsy tumble of raw emotion and newfound truth. This wasn't just writing, it was an unshackling. The emotions, intense and wild, formed a tapestry of survival. I felt the grip of my pen become firm, like a lifeline pulling me from the wreckage, each word a breath. I wasn't just chronicling the past, I was reclaiming the person I had set aside. Words spilled forth, fierce and unwavering, detailing dreams and fears once left unrevealed. Abandoning the quiet, I inscribed each syllable with purpose, every stroke of ink a reclamation. In those words, I found pieces of myself, long forgotten and now beloved. There, amid the quiet of the rising day, new resolve hardened into steel. Each moment on that page was an exploration of freedom. The more I wrote, the less I felt the hands of the past around my throat. This was my life, raw and real. And as I sealed the journal shut, I knew this was just the beginning. I set it down and pressed my hand over the cover, stilling the racing thoughts, feeling a shift as real as the dawning sun. No longer a victim. I closed my eyes, drawing in a deep, empowering breath, exhaling the last of his hold on me. The silence around me was no longer hostile. It was a promise. Tomorrow I would face and continue to write anew. I walked the old street, its cobblestones uneven beneath my feet, like the texture of a familiar lullaby gone slightly off-key. The evening air was thick with memories, the kind that pressed against my skin, like a snug coat I hadn't worn in years. Shadows stretched long and lean, stitching themselves between the cracks in the pavement, and I found myself tracing the path we used to walk, back when the world felt infinite and ours. The cafe where we'd spent countless afternoons came into view, its weathered signs swinging gently in the breeze. I hesitated at the threshold, a pang of longing mixing with a bittersweet pull. It was here that laughter had seemed the most abundant, bubbling between sips of too-hot coffee and stolen glances over well-thumbed books. I could almost hear it, a ghostly echo that danced around my ears, lightly brushing against the shell of a past love. Inside, the clatter of cups and the quiet murmur of conversation buzzed like nostalgia's hum. I took a seat by the window, tracing the worn grain of the wooden table with my fingertips. This was where we had mapped out dreams and dared to imagine a forever, the sun slanting through the glass to light up our world like a gilded promise. Yet, sitting there now, the promises felt dulled, their edges worn soft by reality. I watched as people hurried past the window, strangers in their orbits, each with stories untold and burdens unseen. My reflection gazed back at me from the glass, eyes searching and solemn. Each thread of laughter, so vivid then, so faint now, whispered stories I could almost clutch but never unfold again. As I rose to leave, the waitress, a new face in this tapestry of familiarity, smiled at me. There was something kind in that smile, something that held possibility. With a nod, I slipped back onto the street, closing the door on the echo of voices now only mine. I wandered on, drawn to the little park where we had first collided with fate, the universe conspiring through spring blossoms and errant winds. The place was almost deserted now, filled only with the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant laughter of children at play. I sat on our bench, where would remembered us in scuffs and scratches. I could almost see us, intertwined, wrapped up in the certainty that nothing could touch us, that love would always shield us from the chill of life. But here, in this cradle of memories, I felt a stirring within, a tentative flutter that was neither grief nor regret, but a tender hope unfurling against the constraints of the past. It was an understanding that while these moments had shaped me, they no longer held me prisoner. With each breath of the cool evening air, I felt lighter, as if the memories were shedding their weight and allowing me the freedom I had so desperately craved. In that moment, I realized, these places, with their echoes and imprints, were not chains around my heart, but chapters in a story that continued to evolve. The laughter we had shared was not a haunting refrain, but a melody that taught me harmony amidst discord. I stood up, brushing the leaves from my coat, letting the future breathe its uncertain, hopeful whisper into the space the past had occupied. Each step away from the bench became a promise, a testament to my tethering myself not to what was lost, but to what could be found. As I moved forward, into the embrace of the gathering night, it occurred to me that this journey was more than a revisitation. It was a beginning, a gentle, determined stride towards crafting new echoes, bright with the possibility not yet realized but surely waiting. With each stroke of the pen, my truth flowed like water over a broken dam, fierce and unstoppable. The words, each one a shard of pain now deliberately crafted into something more, gathered momentum until they roared onto the page. I sat hunched over the small desk squeezed in the corner of my bedroom, surrounded by the comfort of clutter, papers stacked high, coffee cups with rings of old stains, and a lamp casting an amber glow over the chaos. I never imagined I'd be here, ink-stained fingers curling over the edge of my testament, turning silent agony into defiance. I took a deep breath, feeling the rise of an anger once suffocating, now liberating. This is not just about me, I whispered to the stillness. The empty room seemed to lean closer, listening to secrets it had long waited to hear. Each word I wrote spoke of betrayals personal and profound, betrayals that had torn through my life with the unseen savagery of an invisible storm. But now, these words were my armor, molded with memories sharper than any sword. They became a rallying cry, intended not just for my own liberation, but for the countless others who had felt the oppressive weight of silence. I thought of the names, faceless shadows in my past, people who had doubted, minimized my voice to a whisper, who had painted my truth in tones of disbelief. But now, I imagined them as a distant audience, a chorus rapt at my every revelation, unable to ignore the crescendo of my testimony. The rain tapped against my window, a gentle percussion that seemed to echo the rhythm of my racing heart. In this cocoon of night, I positioned my stories like beacons, carefully kindling the flame that had dimmed too long. Each sentence was a match struck in the dark, guiding lost souls like mine back to the surface. With each page that filled, the room felt a little less cramped. My heart, tightly bound in fear and deceit for so long, seeped open with a new tenderness, a tender anger born from self-preservation. I could almost see the spine of my truth straightening, growing tall against the shadow of past indignities. Guilt is heavy, I wrote, recalling the nights curled into myself, handling remorse like a heavy shroud. But it can only bury you if you let it. The words on paper were stark declarations of freedom. They were bridges connecting me to every soul who ever felt cowed by shame. Together, we'd rise resilient, breath by breath. With the dawn not too far, the idea of sharing my truth, the dream of voicing my narrative out loud, danced in my mind. It scared me and thrilled me in equal measures. The prospect of standing before others, recounting my journey, filled me with both dread and a thrill of audacious hope. A brush of fear met the steadfast shield I'd lowered over my vulnerabilities. I could almost hear the hushed, hypothetical whispers turn to cheers of solidarity, the skepticism in others' eyes melting into understanding and collective bravery. Maybe, just maybe, my voice could become part of something larger, an echo that reaches spaces I've never touched. And the thought was no longer intimidating. It felt righteous. Every movement of my pen was a promise. To myself, to every voiceless confidant who had reached out in the ether of solidarity. I wasn't alone. We weren't alone. And as I scribbled the final words of this particular night, I breathed out slowly, a long-held breath now free. Tomorrow, these pages might become more than ink on paper. They would be my declaration, unapologetic, untethered, undeniably mine. Standing there, face to face amidst the wreckage of our shared past, I saw in his eyes the longing for something untouched by his lies, whether it was too late or not. The room seemed still, suspended in a frail silence that sat heavily between us. Just a moment ago, it had been alive with voices, a crowd hanging on every word as I bared the truths I'd hidden for too long. He looked diminished in this light, almost boyish in his frailty. It struck me, the incongruity of it all. This man who had lorded over our lives, now so visibly small. His shoulders sagged under an invisible weight, his eyes flickering with something close to defeat. "I didn't think you'd do it," he said finally, his voice cracking on the edge of something raw. "Stand there, in front of everyone. I never thought you'd." He trailed off, words slipping into the void between us. I could hear the tremble laced beneath the bravado, and for a fleeting second, I almost pitied him. Almost. "You never thought I'd what?" I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Find my voice. Stand up to you." He flinched, his gaze dropping to the floor, perhaps trying to gather the vestiges of his fractured dignity. But I wasn't going to fill the silence for him, not anymore. I had spent too many years cushioning the blows of his inadequacies with my silence. "I know I broke us," he whispered, eyes lifting to meet mine, earnestness etched into the lines of his face. "But you, why now?" The question hung between us, full of recrimination and despair. My heart clenched, beating against the walls of my chest like a trapped bird, desperate for an escape. I took a deep breath, feeling the air shudder into my lungs. Because I realized I was losing myself, I began, the words finally given life, pushing up past the barriers I'd erected. Every lie became a chain, binding me tighter. I couldn't breathe. I needed room to be, to exist without drowning in your shadows. His face crumpled, a flash of anguish breaking through the stoicism he wore like armor. For the first time, I saw the cracks, the crumbling edifice of a man too afraid to unclench his fists, too terrified to lose control. It was his turn now to stand vulnerable in the harsh light of truth. "I thought I was protecting us," he said, voice thin, almost pleading. I didn't know. I didn't realize how deep it went. I wanted to believe him, ached to lean into the words and find solace within them. But trust is a fragile thing. Once shattered, it scatters like glass, each piece a reminder of what once was whole. "I don't know if this can be fixed," I said, the admission tasting bitter. "But it has to start here, with honesty. No more excuses, no more running." He nodded slowly, the gravity of what I'd said sinking into the spaces between us. The room, once full of noise and chaos, now echoed with the quiet, an emptiness that felt pregnant with untold possibilities. We stood at a precipice, the ground beneath our feet unsteady but real. As we held each other's gaze, a tentative hope seared a path through the desolation. I felt a shift, subtle yet profound, an unspoken understanding of shared humanity, of grief and guilt, struggling for redemption. Whether this was a beginning or a final goodbye, I couldn't tell. But in that fragile moment, the bitterness faded, leaving a threadbare but genuine sense of peace. "Let's see where this path takes us," I whispered, the words not a promise, but an opening, a tentative step into an uncertain future. The waves whispered faintly against the shore, each tide pulling away the remnants of a story I no longer wished to tell. I stood there, toes digging into the cool, damp sand, watching the horizon blur into a watercolor of fading purples and pinks. It's strange, the things you find solace in after being shattered. The sea had become my confessor, my healer, its endless expanse reflecting the vast possibilities that lay ahead. I'd spent so many nights under these stars, grappling with a truth I couldn't sustain, a reality that felt like a never-ending nightmare. But tonight, as the sun surrendered its final light, casting long, gentle shadows, I felt something shift inside. A seagull's cry pierced the air, snapping me back to the surface, and I smiled softly at the recognition. This was real. I wasn't just a character in someone else's reckless saga. For once, I was the one writing the script. I took a deep breath, the salty air filling my lungs, purging the last vestiges of doubt. I was so tired of feeling like an exhibit of brokenness. For months, I'd been trapped in an echo chamber of his betrayal, my mind replaying every fault line, every whispered lie. I had dissected the why, until it faded into nothing but meaningless syllables. But the why wasn't my burden to carry any longer. It had taken time, countless moments on this very shore, standing as the tide rose and fell, feeling grief morph into resilience. This was my sanctuary where the world's chaos was merely a distant hum, somewhere I could rebuild in peace. Shivering slightly, more from the evening chill than fear, I hugged myself against the cool breeze. "It's over," I whispered, a hint of awe in my voice, the words as liberating as they were daunting. A part of me feared what awaited in the unknown spaces just ahead, but I was learning to embrace that uncertainty. The sun had nearly disappeared now, leaving the sky brushed with the first stars of night. As I gazed up, a single tear slipped down my cheek, glistening in the twilight. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of acceptance, of all I'd endured, all I'd survived. I could almost hear his voice on the wind, the echoes of decisions we'd made together lingering in the air. It would always be a part of me, that past, but I was realizing that it didn't have to define me. Guilt pricked at me again, a soft reminder of what I was leaving behind, what I was choosing over the easy path of returning to something familiar, even if it was broken. But then I thought of the endless sunrises yet to come, each morning a clean slate, waiting for my pen to draft new beginnings. The weight lifted, just a fraction, enough to step forward, one foot, then another, like breaking the surface after being submerged for too long. As I turned my back to the ocean, feeling its steadfast presence gently urging me onward, a sense of peace unfurled within me. I'd been standing on this precipice long enough, teetering between past and future, and it was time to leap forward. Pacing gained certainty, my steps echoing a newfound resolve. The road ahead stretched wide and unknown, beckoning with unseen possibilities, and instead of fear, I felt charged, ready. The horizon may be uncharted, the path unwritten, but it was mine, fully mine, to explore, to shape, and to claim. I was no longer tethered by the memories of betrayal, but buoyed by the promise of what was to come. Empowered by my reclamation, I walked into the twilight, embracing the warmth of new beginnings, everything behind me fading into the gentle, rhythmic sigh of the sea.